In America, there is a small capital gains exemption for primary residents, and depending on where you are, right? It's $250K if you've lived there 2 out of the last 5 years, $500K for a couple, right? And that's a big deal. You should take advantage of that. Though in Silicon Valley, that doesn't go that far.
So let me ask you this, can you quickly summarize the differences between the Australian real estate market and the US real estate market for people?
So thank you for that question. The American real estate market is about 20 times as big as Australia in terms of just number of houses, number of sales, total volume, about 15 to 20 times. And that reflects the size of population. But the amount that Australians spend on property is much larger, right? In terms of the average sale price of a home, in terms of the amount of revenue in the real estate industry, commissions paid and things like that. And the way that's reflected is in America, real estate's a big deal, but the real estate agencies like around my area, obviously I lived in Silicon Valley the last 5 or 10 years, they're kind of like tucked in an office building somewhere, in the town. In Australia, you go near the railway stations, which is the center of commerce in each Australian city, Australian suburb. The prime real estate is taken by real estate agents. And not just 1 or 2. There's like 5 or 10 really big brands. And then each suburb will have its own boutique brands. So you're walking down the main street, of each city, of each suburb. And it is dominated by real estate agencies. And that's because in Australia, we were saying, real estate is Australia's national pastime. When you go to a barbecue, when you go to a dinner party, we're always talking about house prices going up, going down, interest rates going up, going down. And interestingly enough, Australia has some very advantageous capital gains laws, which make it such a very, very attractive investment vehicle, which was certainly my path, once I turned 18. So it's a big deal in Australia. I like to think of it as it's smaller than America, but it's a bigger deal here.
Sure. And you mentioned something interesting. You mentioned that the capital gains is really favorable over there in Australia. So dive into that a little bit, and how is it different than the United States capital gains?
Sure. So I'll give you some personal examples, right? Primary residents. In America, there is a small capital gains exemption for primary residents, and depending on where you are, right? It's $250K if you've lived there 2 out of the last 5 years, $500K for a couple, right? And that's a big deal. You should take advantage of that. Though in Silicon Valley, that doesn't go that far. In America, as long as you're an Australian resident, your primary residence is tax-free.
Wow.
Tax-free. So it's a big deal, right? You have a massive incentive to invest big and continue to invest in your primary residence. And so that's one thing. The other thing is the way that capital gains, the way that expenses are monetized or are counted here. So let's take some specific examples like depreciation, and interest are very, very favorable. And in America, for example, like you can take a depreciation charge, but you pay it back in a sense when you sell the property. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it increases or it decreases the original selling price. In Australia, these are expenses you write off every year. Interest expense write off every year. So that's not for a primary residence. That's for an investment residence. But that's something that's very, very attractive in Australia, which means I think, if you have a steady income and you have borrowing capacity in Australia, there is nothing more attractive than property investing if you can hold for at least 5 years. You're going to make a good 7 to 8% on capital gains on average each year, particularly by a single family dwelling, rather than an apartment. And then if you hold that over time, most people are putting down 20% here. You're going to leverage that 4 or 5 times, and you're getting capital gains on that. And because the interest, the way that you can write off the expense against tax, it's very, very tax efficient.
Yeah, it sounds like it's awesome over there. Australia, the way that I understand, I've never been there, but the way that I understand it, it's pretty much like on the outskirts of Australia is where most of the stuff happens, and then like the middle is where all the kangaroos live. And there's like not a lot there, but like vacant land. That's a
good way to think about it. So